Previously, the controversial episode known as the Satanic Verses was scrutinized, with various scholarly perspectives being taken into account. Through meticulous analysis, it becomes evident that the incident most likely never transpired. The more credible explanation suggests that the Quraysh prostrated due to the profound impact of Surah an-Najm. This unfounded rumor subsequently led to the premature return of the Muslim immigrants from Abyssinia, who, upon their arrival, discovered the report was false. Prior to returning to the main narrative, it is essential to address the details concerning the first group of Muslims who migrated to Abyssinia. Questions arise regarding the individuals who participated in this initial migration and those who did not. While the complete list of participants is intricate and subject to scholarly debate, attention is directed toward the most prominent companions of the Prophet Muhammad. Among them, Abu Bakr holds a unique status as the closest companion of the Prophet. At this early stage, however, neither Abu Bakr nor Umar had migrated to Abyssinia, with Umar not yet having embraced Islam. In contrast, Uthman, along with his wife Ruqayyah, the Prophet's daughter, was indeed among those who undertook the journey. Ali ibn Abi Talib, due to his young age at the time, likely around 9 or 10 years old, was not considered for this migration. Therefore, out of the most notable companions, only Uthman and his wife participated in this early emigration, while Abu Bakr initially intended to join them. The story of Abu Bakr is particularly significant. He had intended to accompany Uthman and the others to Abyssinia, but on the way to Jeddah, he encountered a tribal leader named Ibn ad-Dudhana, who was acquainted with Abu Bakr through previous business dealings. When he learned of their intentions, Ibn ad-Dudhana, astonished, questioned the reason for their departure. Abu Bakr explained that they were fleeing persecution in search of a place where they could worship Allah without hindrance. Recognizing Abu Bakr's prominent status, Ibn ad-Dudhana insisted that someone of his standing should not be compelled to leave Mecca. He offered to intercede on Abu Bakr's behalf, proposing that the Quraysh accept his protection for Abu Bakr. In the tribal system of pre-Islamic Arabia, protection was a crucial social mechanism, and Ibn ad-Dudhana's offer represented a significant gesture. Abu Bakr agreed to this arrangement, and they returned to Mecca, while the remainder of the group continued to Abyssinia. Following their return, Ibn ad-Dudhana made a public declaration at the Kaaba, requesting that the Quraysh accept his protection for Abu Bakr. This was not a straightforward matter, as Ibn ad-Dudhana belonged to a different tribe, making his offer akin to a neighboring country offering asylum to a foreign citizen. Despite the complexities, the Quraysh reluctantly agreed to grant Abu Bakr protection, but with a critical stipulation: Abu Bakr was prohibited from praying publicly. Before this, Abu Bakr had been among the few Muslims who bravely performed his prayers openly at the Kaaba. However, this agreement required him to maintain a lower profile, at least until the eventual conversion of Umar ibn al-Khattab, which would significantly alter the dynamics within Mecca. At that time, only the most courageous Muslims dared to offer their prayers at the Kaaba, a place of significant religious and cultural importance. Among those who displayed such bravery were the Prophet Muhammad, who consistently prayed there, and Abu Bakr, who occasionally joined him. However, the Quraysh imposed a restriction on Abu Bakr, allowing him to worship only in private. They agreed to grant him protection under the condition that he refrains from public prayer, a term that both parties ultimately accepted. In response to this restriction, Abu Bakr innovatively adapted his home by extending it to create a private space for worship, a precursor to what would later become the concept of a mosque. Although this extension was part of his home, he used it as a place to perform his prayers aloud, capitalizing on the technicality that it was within his residence. This subtle defiance did not go unnoticed. Abu Bakr's prayers, delivered with a melodious and emotionally charged recitation, drew the attention of the surrounding community. His captivating recitations, marked by deep spiritual emotion, even moved him to tears, reflecting his profound reverence for the divine. As word spread, women and children would gather near his home, drawn by the beauty of his Quranic recitations. The situation escalated to the point where the Quraysh, realizing that even this private worship was having a public impact, reneged on their earlier agreement. They sent a message to Ibn ad-Dudhana, insisting that Abu Bakr must cease his prayers, even within the confines of his own home. Confronted with this ultimatum, Ibn ad-Dudhana approached Abu Bakr, explaining that he could no longer provide protection unless Abu Bakr agreed to stop praying altogether. Faced with this decision, Abu Bakr chose to relinquish the tribal protection, expressing his firm trust in the protection of Allah alone. From that point onward, Abu Bakr lived in Mecca without any human protection, relying solely on divine guardianship. This vulnerability was starkly demonstrated when Abu Bakr intervened to protect the Prophet from an attack, during which he was severely beaten, leaving him incapacitated for over a week. Despite his noble lineage as a member of the Quraysh tribe, the withdrawal of both his own tribes and Ibn ad-Dudhana's protection rendered him defenseless, allowing his enemies to act with impunity. Abu Bakr continued to endure these hardships until the Prophet's eventual migration to Medina. Historical records indicate that approximately 14 to 17 individuals emigrated to Abyssinia during this period, with the most credible accounts suggesting that the group consisted of 12 men and 5 women. After hearing the rumor that the Quraysh had accepted Islam, these emigrants eagerly returned, only to be met with the harsh reality that the situation in Mecca remained unchanged. This revelation was a profound shock, leading some to contemplate returning to Abyssinia before even re-entering Mecca. Their journey was fraught with emotional and psychological turmoil, indicates the immense challenges faced by the early Muslim community. They remarked, "Since we are so close, let us return and assess the current situation in Mecca." Life had been exceedingly difficult for them in Abyssinia, as they were faced with the challenges of adapting to a foreign culture and language. The Abyssinian environment was vastly different from what they were accustomed to, presenting them with hardships beyond what they could have imagined. It is important to note a parallel here. Historically, one of the penalties under Islamic law, which is now largely obsolete due to changes in societal norms, was the punishment of exile. This punishment required individuals to leave their homeland and live in a foreign region. An example would be a person from Hijaz being sent to live in Najd, or vice versa. This form of punishment was intended for specific minor crimes, allowing offenders to avoid physical penalties like flogging or imprisonment by instead relocating for a year. However, in contemporary times, such an exile would not be considered a punishment but rather an opportunity for leisure. The Sahaba, in essence, imposed this form of exile upon themselves when they migrated to Abyssinia, choosing to endure the hardships of a foreign land. As soon as deciding to return, the Sahaba resolved to assess the situation in Mecca firsthand. Their departure from Mecca had been akin to renouncing their tribal affiliations, leaving them without the traditional protections afforded by their tribes. As they prepared to re-enter Mecca, they understood that they could no longer expect the same protection and would need to secure new sponsorship, akin to obtaining an entry visa in modern terms. Each of them had to seek new protection to safely return to their homeland. For instance, Uthman ibn Maz'un, a prominent Sahabi who has numerous stories in the Sirah and who later died as a martyr in one of the battles, reached out to al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, a renowned poet with whom he had a pre-existing friendship. Al-Walid agreed to extend his protection to Uthman and publicly announced this protection, which was a formal way of enacting such agreements. Al-Walid, a man of immense influence in Mecca, ensured that Uthman remained entirely safe, as no one dared to harm him under al-Walid's protection. It is noteworthy that al-Walid was a figure of significant power, rivaling even Abu Jahl, and was referenced in the Quran in verses revealed about him. Al-Walid was also the father of Khalid ibn al-Walid, a famous military commander. Despite being under such powerful protection, Uthman ibn Maz'un struggled with the moral implications of his situation. He witnessed the ongoing persecution of other Muslims and felt deep guilt for his own safety, which was guaranteed solely because of his friendship with al-Walid. Driven by his conscience, Uthman approached al-Walid and requested that he withdraw his protection, explaining that he could not bear to see his fellow Muslims suffer while he remained unscathed. Although al-Walid expressed concern and reassured Uthman that he had fulfilled his duty of protection, Uthman insisted on relinquishing this privilege. He emphasized that his decision was not due to any fault of al-Walid but was motivated by his desire for fairness and solidarity with his brethren who lacked similar protection. Following this, al-Walid publicly announced at the Kaaba that Uthman had returned his protection. Uthman, in turn, confirmed that his decision was personal and not a reflection of any inadequacy on al-Walid's part. This public declaration ensured that Uthman would not be immediately targeted for retribution, although it left him vulnerable. Shortly thereafter, as Uthman walked through Mecca, he encountered Labid ibn Rabi'a, one of the most celebrated poets of pre-Islamic Arabia, who was reciting poetry to an audience of Quraysh. Although Labid would eventually embrace Islam, at that time, he was not yet a Muslim. Labid's poetry, highly esteemed in pre-Islamic society, was a source of great entertainment for the Quraysh, who had invited him to Mecca for their festival. As Uthman listened, Labid recited a line of poetry, "Behold, everything except Allah is perishable." After hearing this, Uthman was deeply moved by the sentiment. He responded with admiration, acknowledging the truth in the statement, "Indeed, you have spoken the truth. Everything besides Allah is without purpose. The only pursuit of ultimate significance is the worship of Allah, for all else is ephemeral." However, when the verse continued, stating, "Every single blessing will eventually fade," Uthman voiced his dissent. He asserted, "You have spoken falsely, for the joys of paradise are eternal and will never diminish." This exchange took place in a prominent gathering, and it is important to envision the scene: a dignitary, surrounded by the Quraysh elite, publicly renouncing his protection, thereby making a bold statement of faith. As the assembly dispersed, and Uthman's words were still resonating, the poet Labid, who had been the guest of honor, felt slighted. Unaware of Uthman's conversion to Islam, Labid perceived Uthman's interruption as disrespectful and rebuked the Quraysh, saying, "Since when has it become customary for you to mock your guests? I have come at your invitation to recite my poetry, and yet I am treated with disdain." The situation escalated when an infuriated attendee struck Uthman, leaving his eye swollen. Disturbed by the incident, al-Walid hurried to Uthman's side, pleading with him to reconsider his withdrawal of protection. Al-Walid, seeking to rectify the situation, urged Uthman to return under his guardianship. However, Uthman, displaying remarkable resolve, refused, stating, "My other eye now craves the blessings received by this one." This narrative illustrates the diverse responses among the companions regarding the acceptance of protection offered by the Quraysh. While some, like Abu Salama, availed themselves of such protection, others, like Uthman, chose to renounce it. Abu Salama, a cousin of the Prophet through his mother, was among those who sought protection. Although he belonged to the Banu Makhzum tribe, known for its opposition to Islam, his mother's connection to the Prophet provided him with a unique opportunity. Abu Salama, aware of the potential repercussions of approaching Abu Jahl, a member of his tribe, for protection, instead reached out to his maternal uncle, Abu Talib. After receiving Abu Salama's request, Abu Talib readily agreed to offer his protection. This act, however, provoked the ire of the Banu Makhzum, who viewed Abu Talib's intervention as an affront to their authority. They confronted Abu Talib, challenging his decision to extend protection to a member of their tribe. Abu Talib, undeterred by their objections, defended his actions by stating, "If I am willing to protect one nephew," referring to the Prophet Muhammad, "why should I not protect the other," referring to Abu Salama. This incident highlights the complex social dynamics of Meccan society, where tribal affiliations and familial loyalties often intersected with matters of faith and honor. The Quraysh, resolute in their stance, surrounded the house of Abu Talib, leading to a heated argument. Yet, in an unexpected turn of events, Allah brought about a resolution through a surprising source, Abu Lahab. Despite his usual antagonism toward Islam, Abu Lahab stood up and exclaimed, "Have you not tormented this old man enough?" Although Abu Lahab harbored no love for the Prophet Muhammad, he was moved by a sense of brotherly compassion for his elder brother, Abu Talib. Abu Lahab, motivated by tribal loyalty rather than religious conviction, asserted, "Let him be. How much longer will you harass him? If you persist, I will be forced to take his side." Abu Lahab's defense of Abu Talib was driven by a desire to protect the honor of his family and tribe, rather than any affinity for Islam. It is important to note that this type of affection, rooted in kinship rather than faith, does not confer spiritual merit. Even Abu Talib's profound love for the Prophet Muhammad, while sincere, was paternal and tribal rather than religious, and thus did not ultimately shield him from divine judgment. In this remarkable moment, we see Abu Lahab, typically a staunch opponent of Islam, standing against Abu Jahl in defense of his brother. Such incidents remind us that Allah's assistance to his religion can manifest through unexpected means, even through those who do not believe. The Prophet Muhammad later remarked in Medina, "Verily, Allah can aid this religion through a disbeliever." These occurrences vividly illustrate the truth of the Prophet's words. However, despite this incident, the situation in Mecca remained largely unchanged, with the Quraysh continuing their persecution of the Muslims. The initial group of emigrants who had sought refuge in Abyssinia reconvened to discuss their next course of action. Most of them concluded that their return to Mecca had been premature and resolved to go back to Abyssinia. During their brief stay in Mecca, lasting only 2 to 3 weeks, news of the relative safety and peace in Abyssinia spread among the Muslim community. Although life in Abyssinia presented cultural and linguistic challenges, it offered the essential blessings of food and security, which are among the greatest gifts Allah bestows after faith. As a result, a significant number of Muslims, possibly 30 to 50% of the Meccan Muslim population, decided to emigrate to Abyssinia. This was a considerable proportion of the community, indicating that Allah's wisdom in allowing the initial group to return temporarily may have been to encourage a larger exodus. Those who had experienced the benefits of life in Abyssinia shared their positive experiences, convincing many others to make the journey. Thus, during the second migration, more than 80 Muslims, led by Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, the Prophet's cousin, set out for Abyssinia. This number was more than 4 times the initial group. Notably, however, some members of the original group of 17 did not return to Abyssinia with the larger group. Among them was Uthman ibn Affan, who chose to remain in Mecca. He later emigrated to Medina, participated in the Battle of Badr, and continued to play a prominent role in the early Muslim community. Meanwhile, others, such as Abu Salama and his wife Salama, did return to Abyssinia, where Abu Salama eventually passed away. Another significant figure, Mus'ab ibn Umair, known for being the first to emigrate to Medina, also did not return to Abyssinia during the second migration. The Prophet Muhammad, recognizing the intense suffering endured by young companion Mus'ab at the hands of his own parents, who subjected him to severe torture, first sent him to Abyssinia for refuge. This companion later returned, determined to remain close to the Prophet. Within 3 years prior to the Prophet's own migration to Medina, he dispatched this individual to the city as soon as the first group of Muslims embraced Islam. The Prophet instructed him to reside in Medina, marking his critical role in the early Islamic community. Consequently, he did not return to Abyssinia as others did. At this time, Mecca likely had a small population, perhaps only a few hundred residents. Thus, when over 80 people decided to emigrate, it represented a significant portion, potentially 15 to 20%, of the city's inhabitants. Mecca was not a large, bustling metropolis. Rather, it consisted of small sub-tribes, each with only a handful of members. For instance, the Banu Hashim had just 10 brothers, the descendants of Abdul Muttalib. Considering the size of these tribes, it is estimated that the total population of Mecca did not exceed 1,000 people, and perhaps was even as low as 600 to 700. Therefore, the departure of 80 individuals was a significant embarrassment for the Quraysh, especially since such a migration was unprecedented in Arabian history. The Quraysh, known as the strongest and most elite tribe, were deeply shamed by this exodus. They were the custodians of the Kaaba, and having a substantial percentage of their tribe leave was intolerable. In response, they decided to take action to prevent further emigration to Abyssinia. To this end, they sent 2 emissaries to appeal directly to the Negus, the ruler of Abyssinia. The grave of al-Shama, who later became known for his just rule, remains a well-known site in Abyssinia. The Quraysh selected Mr. Ibn al-As, a shrewd and intelligent politician who would later convert to Islam and become a close advisor to the Caliph Maya. At this time, however, Amr was not yet a Muslim and was recognized for his cunning political skills. The Quraysh chose him for this delicate mission, knowing his capabilities, and sent another individual with him. As soon as arriving in Abyssinia, the Muslims were met with kindness and hospitality by the Negus, as narrated by Salama, who would later become one of the Prophet's wives. Her detailed accounts of life in Abyssinia, preserved in sources such as Sahih Bukhari, provide valuable insights. Salama recounted that upon their arrival, the Negus granted them protection in their faith, allowing them to worship Allah without fear of persecution or ridicule. Remarkably, they did not even encounter the typical hostility or racial slurs often faced by minorities in a foreign land, as is evident in various societies, including contemporary examples. However, the Quraysh, after learning of the favorable conditions the Muslims enjoyed in Abyssinia, devised a plan to undermine their refuge. They dispatched 2 of their most capable men, loaded with valuable gifts, primarily fine leather goods from Mecca, to persuade the Negus to expel the Muslim refugees. Mecca was renowned for its distinctive camel leather, a commodity not available in Abyssinia. This leather was a major export of Mecca, while Medina's principal export was dates. Consequently, the Quraysh sent a considerable quantity of luxurious camel skins, along with other valuable gifts, with their emissaries. Upon arrival in Abyssinia, the first action of these envoys was to visit the Negus' ministers and distribute expensive gifts, essentially bribing them. They presented these officials with fine leather goods and instructed them to support their request to the Negus, promising further rewards for their assistance. This blatant act of bribery aimed to secure the return of the Muslim refugees. The following day, the emissaries approached the Negus, accusing the Muslim emigrants of abandoning their original faith and refusing to adopt Christianity or any other recognized religion. They portrayed these individuals as rebellious and misguided, and urged the Negus to extradite them, asserting their superior knowledge of the Muslims' supposed transgressions. To reinforce their plea, they presented the Negus with lavish gifts, including perfumes and exquisite leather goods. In contemporary terms, this approach mirrors modern lobbying, where political figures receive financial support for their campaigns in exchange for favorable decisions. Unlike current practices, which often blur the lines between lobbying and bribery, Islamic teachings have historically condemned such practices. The Prophet Muhammad, for instance, demonstrated vehement opposition to bribery, as illustrated by an incident involving a zakat collector who accepted gifts meant for himself rather than for public use. The Prophet, upon learning of this, publicly condemned the practice, emphasizing that public servants should not accept personal gifts and should perform their duties without personal gain. This incident underscores a significant difference between Islamic principles and contemporary practices, where monetary influence often sways political decisions. The Quraysh, fully aware of this tactic, sought to manipulate the Negus and his court through a combination of bribery and strategic appeals, highlighting religious, social, and potentially economic differences. They portrayed the Muslim emigrants as sectarians, dismissed them as youthful dissenters, and hinted at economic repercussions for Abyssinia if their requests were not heeded. The Quraysh, recognizing their inability to control the Muslim emigrants and their natural aversion to the unknown, sought to return them by employing various tactics of intimidation. They attempted to scare the Negus with religious, social, political, and cultural arguments, labeling the Muslims as peculiar and disruptive. This approach is reminiscent of contemporary strategies where unfamiliar groups are portrayed negatively to influence decision-makers. Having presenting their case, the Quraysh's bribes seemed to have swayed the advisors, who recommended returning the Muslims to Mecca. However, the Negus, valuing fairness and justice, refused to act hastily. He acknowledged the Muslims' right to seek asylum in his land and determined that he must hear their side of the story before making a decision. This reflects a principle of justice that transcends time, illustrating how even before the advent of modern legal systems, a just ruler would ensure both sides were heard. The Negus sent a messenger to the Muslims, inviting them to the palace to explain their situation. This invitation caused apprehension among the emigrants, who had never directly interacted with the Negus. Despite their fear, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, a key representative, reassured them to remain truthful and brave, as instructed by the Prophet Muhammad. This commitment to honesty and integrity underscores a fundamental principle of Islam, steadfastness in truth, regardless of circumstances. When the Muslims arrived at the palace, they were greeted by the Negus, surrounded by his advisors and senior officials. The traditional practice of prostrating before the king was observed, but Ja'far and his companions refused to bow, adhering to their belief that only Allah deserves such reverence. This act of principle, performed under duress, highlights the profound dedication of the Muslims to their faith, even in the face of adversity. Their refusal to compromise their religious convictions exemplifies their commitment to worshipping only Allah and maintaining their integrity, irrespective of their vulnerable position. The Negus, unable to understand Arabic and reliant on a translator, inquired about the new religion introduced by the Muslims. He questioned why they had abandoned their ancestral faith and yet did not adopt Christianity or Judaism, wondering about the nature of this novel belief system. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, renowned for his eloquence, responded with a speech that remains exemplary in its articulation and depth. This response underscores the reason why the Prophet Muhammad selected Ja'far as a leader. Effective leadership demands both charisma and eloquence, qualities Ja'far embodied with distinction. Ja'far's refusal to bow before the Negus, though a risky stance, reflected his steadfast commitment to his faith. Such sincerity inevitably garners respect, even from those who may oppose one's beliefs. This principle is evident in human interactions. Firm adherence to one's principles often commands respect, even from adversaries. In his response, Ja'far recounted the pre-Islamic era of ignorance and idol worship in Mecca, contrasting it with the moral and ethical framework of the Abyssinians. He detailed the social ills and moral depravity prevalent in Mecca before the advent of Islam, describing a society marked by injustice and exploitation. The arrival of the Prophet Muhammad, who was known for his integrity and honesty, brought a message of monotheism, in line with the religious principles of both Christianity and Judaism. Despite the suffering inflicted upon them by their oppressors, the Muslims chose to seek refuge in Abyssinia, valuing the Negus's reputed generosity and justice. Ja'far's impromptu yet compelling address adeptly appealed to the Negus's sense of fairness and religious commonality. By contrasting the negative aspects of the Quraysh emissary's claims with the virtues of his own faith, Ja'far turned the situation in favor of the Muslims within a few minutes. His eloquence and strategic presentation of the facts reveal the depth of his understanding and the sophistication of his rhetoric. Impressed by Ja'far's speech, the Negus requested a recitation from the Quran. Ja'far recited the opening passages of Surah Maryam, which describe the virgin birth of Jesus and Mary's story. This choice was particularly poignant, highlighting the shared elements of monotheism and reverence for Jesus between Islam and Christianity. The selection of this surah, known for its profound themes and resonance with Christian beliefs, further endeared Ja'far to the Negus and solidified the Muslim standing in his court. The grandeur of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib's voice resonating through the halls of the Negus's palace, his recitation of the Quran captivating the assembly. The priests, ministers, and esteemed dignitaries fell silent, their attention riveted by the melodious verses echoing through the chamber for a duration of approximately 15 minutes. Ja'far's recitation of Surah Maryam, spanning 3.5 pages, was not merely a brief performance but a sustained and profound presentation. Picture yourself in that setting, a powerful and evocative recitation lasting for a significant period, akin to a lengthy session of Tarawih prayers. The impact of Ja'far's recitation was palpable. Even those who did not comprehend the Arabic text were moved to tears. The Quran, known for its profound emotional and spiritual effects, touched the hearts of the patriarchs, and the Negus himself wept upon receiving the translation. The Negus declared that this recitation, imbued with the messages of Moses and Jesus, emanated from the same divine source. He resolutely decided not to hand over the Muslims and instructed the emissaries to depart, affirming that he would not reconsider his decision. As the emissaries left in disgrace, one of them, possibly Emir, suggested a final attempt to sway the Negus. Despite his companion's reluctance, expressing a sentiment of resignation, the emissary insisted on making one last effort the following day. The next day, when the emissaries sought an audience once more, the Negus inquired about the Muslims' beliefs regarding Jesus Christ. He was intrigued by allegations that the Muslims held blasphemous views about Jesus, whom Christians regard as the Son of God. The urgency of the summons heightened the Muslims' anxiety, but Ja'far remained resolute. He stated that they would adhere strictly to the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, affirming Jesus as a servant and messenger of Allah, born of the Virgin Mary, and maintaining their stance despite potential repercussions. This steadfast adherence to their beliefs, even in the face of adversity, demonstrated the firm's commitment of the early Muslims. The episode illustrates an important lesson. The Sahaba utilized the existing systems to combat oppression and advocate for their rights. Despite the Nidus not being a Muslim, Jafar effectively navigated the system of his time to seek justice. This approach underscores the principle that engaging with and leveraging contemporary systems, regardless of their nature, can be a viable strategy in the pursuit of justice and truth. In reflecting on this story, it is evident that employing the available mechanisms to challenge oppression and uphold one's principles is both practical and necessary. The example set by Jafar ibn Abi Talib serves as a model for addressing injustices within the framework of prevailing systems, demonstrating that one need not reject a system outright but can work within it to effect change. Jafar, bravely in his commitment to truth, emphasized that he would not alter his principles. Jafar's approach illustrates a key principle. While he was firm in his beliefs, he avoided unnecessary confrontation. He did not criticize the Trinity or the Christian doctrine directly, but instead focused on affirming what he believed to be true. This strategic reticence allowed him to maintain his position without escalating tensions unnecessarily. His wisdom lay in presenting his beliefs without provoking the Nidus, demonstrating a nuanced understanding of diplomacy. The Nidus, recognizing the alignment between Jafar's statements and his own beliefs about Jesus Christ, was further impressed. The Nidus, who did not subscribe to the traditional doctrine of the Trinity, found resonance in Jafar's account. He remarked that Jafar's message aligned closely with the teachings of Jesus Christ, noting that there was only a minor difference, akin to the size of a twig. This comment highlighted that Jafar's message was in harmony with the Nidus' own views. Ultimately, the Nidus made a decisive judgment. He ordered the emissaries to leave, instructing them to take back the gifts they had presented. This act of returning the gifts was a deliberate affront, emphasizing his rejection of their bribes. The emissaries departed in disgrace, stripped of their gifts, which had been a symbol of their failed mission. This gesture indicates the severity of their failure and the seriousness with which the Nidus regarded their attempt to sway him. The Muslims remained in Abyssinia, receiving exemplary hospitality and neighborly treatment, until their eventual return to the Prophet in Mecca. When the Nidus picked up a twig and remarked that Jesus Christ had said nothing beyond this, rumors spread accusing him of heresy and abandonment of his ancestors' faith. This led to internal dissent among the ministers and politicians, who began privately denouncing the Nidus as insufficiently Christian and holding heretical views. There was even speculation about a potential coup. Aware of the growing discontent, the Nidus, informed by his sympathizers, decided to confront the dissenters directly. He inscribed a declaration on a parchment in his own language, affirming his belief in the oneness of God and that Jesus Christ is a prophet and servant of God. This parchment was discreetly kept inside his robe. The Nidus then summoned the instigators to his private chambers and questioned their grievances, asking if he had not been a fair and benevolent ruler who improved the kingdom's situation. The dissenters acknowledged his fairness but accused him of abandoning Christian doctrine and holding heretical beliefs. The Nidus asked them to state their beliefs, to which they responded that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, the Savior, and part of the Trinity. The Nidus swore by God that the belief inscribed on the parchment in his robe was precisely what he professed. While this declaration was truthful, it was intended to show his alignment with his own faith, though interpreted by the dissenters as an affirmation of Christian doctrine. The internal conflict subsided once the Nidus clarified his position. Before this meeting, he had discreetly informed the Muslims of potential threats to his life, instructing them to proceed to a specific location to retrieve a ship and seek refuge if he were killed. Fortunately, this precaution proved unnecessary as the crisis was averted. The Nidus' deep faith and concern for the Muslims were evident. Al-Bayhaqi, in his Sunan, records that the Prophet Muhammad, after migrating to Medina, sent a letter to the Nidus inviting him to embrace Islam. The Nidus responded affirmatively, expressing his belief in the Prophet's message and offering to serve him if commanded. He confirmed privately to the Prophet his acceptance of Islam. During the 12 years the Muslims resided in Abyssinia, historical records are limited. One significant event involved a rival royal faction in Abyssinia challenging the Nidus' authority, which threatened to escalate into civil war. Fearing for the Nidus' stability and the potential installation of an adversary, the Muslims prayed fervently for divine intervention to ensure the Negus' continued rule and the preservation of peace in the region. The situation escalated to the point of civil war, culminating in a battle between the two factions. A meeting was convened to determine the next course of action, focusing on who would gather intelligence about the battle's outcome. It was decided that one among them should observe the battle discreetly to report the results before external sources could provide this information. Consequently, a volunteer was sought, and Zubair, a cousin of the Prophet, offered to undertake this task. He prepared for the journey with provisions and proceeded to observe the battle, which took place on the banks of the Nile River. Zubair positioned himself at a considerable distance from the conflict and awaited the outcome. During this time, fervent prayers were offered for the continued success and authority of the Negus, requesting divine support and stabilization. After a few days, Zubair returned, his face radiant with relief and joy, bearing the news that the Negus had triumphed and would remain in power. This period highlighted the political rather than religious nature of the conflict. The Muslims, aware of the Negus' covert support for their faith, were emotionally aligned with his cause but could not directly intervene due to their status as non-citizens. This scenario provides a broader principle. When two political entities are at odds, and one exhibits greater sympathy towards a particular group, support should be aligned accordingly. If the Abyssinian Muslims had been in a position to assist the Negus directly, it is likely they would have done so. Despite their inability to participate directly due to their foreign status, they remained deeply concerned about his fate. The profound anxiety experienced when hearing of the potential loss of the Negus reflects a broader commitment to defending one's rights and freedoms. The final point of significance is the Negus' death, which occurred several years later. After learning of his passing, the Prophet Muhammad, in Medina, received immediate notification of the Negus' death from Jibril. In a rare and unprecedented act, the Prophet commanded the companions to perform a funeral prayer, known as Salat al-Janazah, for the Negus. This was the only instance in Islamic history where the Prophet conducted such a prayer without the deceased's physical presence. This solemn ceremony underscores the profound respect and honor accorded to the Negus in the annals of Islamic tradition.